This is the picture they hoped would stay hidden. 5 major corporate emblems, 5 iconic American powerhouses, their identities being peeled off skyscrapers in Houston, Detroit, and Charlotte, only to reappear on shining new buildings in Toronto, Vancouver, and Montreal. As of 6 a.m. today, Wednesday, February 25th, 2026, the most massive corporate migration in North American history has formally begun. For the first time since the War of 1812, U.S. economic strength is physically crossing the border to the north. And unlike back then, no bullets were exchanged. The companies chose this path themselves. We're looking at $78 billion in combined market value. We're looking at 43,000 U.S. jobs. We're looking at 5 Fortune 500 firms that gazed at the United States, the planet's most powerful economy, and decided, thanks, but we'll take our chances in Canada instead. This isn't merely a move, it's a rejection. And it unfolded more rapidly than almost anyone predicted. President Trump, already battered by the Japan bond meltdown, collapsing approval numbers, and the continuing legal battle with New York over his personal holdings, opened his eyes this morning to the most damaging economic story of his term. The White House has plunged into complete crisis. People inside the West Wing say the mood feels like the end of the world. The president is said to be pushing for urgent executive actions to halt the exits, threatening to use the International Emergency Economic Powers Act to lock corporate assets in place, and shouting at his trade team that the tariffs were meant to pull businesses back home, not send them running north. In this special report, we will detail precisely which firms are departing and the reasons behind it. We will clarify how the financial structure of a large-scale corporate inversion exodus actually works. We will reveal how Canada pulled off the most crippling economic strike since OPEC's heyday, and we will confront the question almost no one in Washington dares to voice. Is this the start of the decline of American economic dominance? Hold on tight. The empire is bleeding badly. To grasp why 5 CEOs just made the boldest call in modern U.S. corporate history, you need to look at the past 18 months. It begins with tariffs. Late in 2025, the Trump administration rolled out broad new duties on Canadian goods, 25% across the board, covering lumber, aluminum, auto components, and more. The official aim was to penalize Canada for alleged unfair trading and compel a rewrite of the USMCA. But Washington failed to foresee the real outcome. Canada refused to back down. Canada hit back. And then Canada went further than simple counterpunch. It started recruiting. Leaked papers acquired by the Financial Times show that in September 2025, the Canadian government quietly launched an operation known as Project Magnet. Run together by Innovation Canada and the Finance Department, it dangled an extraordinary set of benefits at American corporations ready to shift their head offices north. We're talking 12.5% corporate tax for the opening decade versus the U.S. effective rate of 21%. We're talking tariff-free entry to the European Union market via Canada's CTA deal. We're talking fast-tracked work visas for as many as 5,000 staff per firm. We're talking heavily subsidized office space in priority economic districts across Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal, Calgary, and Ottawa. According to people close to the Canadian Finance Ministry, the full incentive bundle surpassed $14 billion in tax relief, direct grants, and infrastructure promises. This wasn't gentle persuasion. This was aggressive economic poaching, built to take advantage of the precise weaknesses created by U.S. trade decisions. Let's identify the companies because the details carry more weight than the story alone. First target, Stellantis North America. Already enraged by 25% duties on parts made in Canada that supply its Detroit plants, the car maker declared Tuesday it will move its North American headquarters from Auburn Hills, Michigan, to Windsor, Ontario. The symbolism is brutal. Windsor sits directly across the river from Detroit. Workers will literally look at their former building from the new one. The shift involves 200 positions and roughly $19 billion in market value. The CEO is said to have told directors the tariff arithmetic was straightforward. Remaining in the U.S. costs $2.3 billion yearly in duties. Relocating to Canada cuts that by $1.8 billion while unlocking tariff-free EU sales. Second target, Dow Chemical. The Midland, Michigan chemical titan is heading to Sarnia, Ontario, just across from Port Huron. The tariff damage to Dow was ruinous. $740 million a year on cross-border chemical movements alone. Canada provided Dow a specialized chemical processing zone with discounted power rates courtesy of Ontario Hydro. The relocation covers 6,400 jobs and $38 billion in market capitalization. A person close to Dow's executive suite told Reuters the board vote was unanimous. The reported comment was blunt. The American regulatory and tariff climate has turned openly hostile to chemical production. That statement came from Dow's board, not from any political opponent. Third target, the U.S. arm of Magna International. Originally a Canadian company, Magna had grown enormously inside the United States over recent decades. Now, it is bringing its 11,000 American workers back across the line, centralizing in Aurora, Ontario. That shift moves $9 billion worth of economic activity. Fourth target, Nutrien, the planet's biggest fertilizer producer, is transferring its U.S. operations center from Deerfield, Illinois, to Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, carrying 4,200 jobs and about $7 billion in related activity along with it. Fifth target, Brookfield Asset Management is shifting its prized New York City office, the centerpiece of its U.S. footprint, back to its Toronto home base, redirecting $5 billion in assets under management oversight to Bay Street. 5 firms, 5 departures, 5 gaps torn into the U.S. economic structure that won't heal quickly. But here's the part almost no one is mentioning. These 5 are merely the opening group. A private survey done by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, leaked to Bloomberg Tuesday evening, reveals that 23 more Fortune 500 companies currently have active relocation reviews in progress. 23. The study shows businesses in autos, aerospace, pharmaceuticals, and agribusiness are seriously examining options in Canada, Mexico, and even Europe. The Chamber's internal note called the moment a corporate confidence collapse on a scale never seen before. CEO faith in American trade policy has plunged to 22%, the lowest level recorded since the index began in 1987. That figure should alarm you far more than any news banner. Let me walk through the financial reality of what occurs when a company this large changes its legal home. This goes way beyond swapping the address on stationery. When Stellantis relocates to Windsor, every subsidiary, every holding entity, every IP holding gets reorganized under Canadian corporate rules. Transfer pricing, the mechanism multinationals use to divide profits across borders, changes completely. Income once taxed at 21% in the U.S. now faces 12.5% in Canada. The U.S. Treasury forfeits that money forever. Spread that across 5 companies, and the latest Congressional Budget Office estimate, released just hours ago, forecasts a permanent $12.4 billion yearly drop in federal tax receipts. That's $12.4 billion every year. That won't support Social Security, won't support Medicare, won't support the military. It comes straight from the taxes paid by Americans who remain. The damage deepens with knock-on consequences. When Dow exits Midland, Michigan, the local economy doesn't simply weaken, it implodes. Midland's 42,000 people rely on Dow as the top employer, top taxpayer, and biggest contributor to schools, the hospital, and community projects. Officials in Midland County expect property tax collections to fall 34% within 18 months. Schools face budget cuts. The hospital loses its major insurance base. Restaurants, cleaners, dealerships that depended on Dow paychecks watch their income disappear almost instantly. This isn't theory. This is a town dying. The identical pattern hits Auburn Hills with Stellantis gone, Deerfield with Nutrien gone. Entire communities anchored by these corporations are being hollowed out live. A flash study released this morning by the Brookings Institution calculates the broader economic fallout from the 5 moves surpasses $31 billion when you include supply chain interruptions, lower household spending, and falling real estate values in the impacted areas. And here's what turns this into a national security problem, not solely an economic one. Almost no one on television is raising this point. Dow produces chemicals essential for defense uses. Stellantis fulfills military vehicle contracts. Nutrien supplies 22% of North America's fertilizer, the bedrock of food production. When headquarters and key decision-making move to Canada, the United States loses influence over their strategic choices. A firm headquartered in Canada reports to Canadian regulators, Canadian courts, and ultimately Canadian priorities. The Pentagon is reportedly deeply concerned. A leaked note from the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition labels the Dow move a potential weakness in the defense industrial base that demands urgent cross-agency examination. Now consider the White House reaction, because this is where an economic problem becomes a constitutional flashpoint. Administration insiders report the president called an emergency National Economic Council session at 4 a.m. today. It ran 3 hours. By 7 a.m., he had reportedly dismissed every economist present. He ordered lawyers to identify any legal tool that could physically stop these companies from leaving U.S. territory. He raised the possibility of using the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, the same law applied to freeze terrorist and hostile state assets, to prevent American businesses from moving to a NATO partner. Pause on that. The president is contemplating anti-terror finance measures against domestic companies simply for choosing a different business location. Legal experts from every viewpoint are calling the idea unhinged. IEPA demands a proclaimed national emergency tied to an unusual and extraordinary danger to U.S. security or economy. Moving headquarters to Canada fails that test under any sensible reading of the law, yet logic has vanished from the discussion. The West Wing is in pure survival posture. Every major economic signal is bright red at once. The Japan bond collapse has wrecked the debt market. Stocks have lost $4.2 trillion in the last 3 weeks. The dollar index is down 8% since December. Consumer confidence reached a 14-year bottom on Monday, and the corporate departures are now speeding the hemorrhage beyond anyone's ability to stop it. Here is the overlooked link that binds everything. The mainstream press has entirely missed it. The Japan bond crash and this corporate flight are not separate disasters. They are the same disaster showing up through different symptoms. Japan's bond implosion sparked a worldwide reassessment of risk. Global interest rates surged. U.S. borrowing costs jumped 180 basis points in just 14 days. For heavy capital businesses like Dow and Stellantis, that rate spike turned the tariff pain intolerable. They were already bleeding from duties. The higher interest expense tore the bandage away. Meanwhile, Canada pursued the opposite monetary path. The Bank of Canada trimmed rates by 50 basis points in January, while the Fed stayed flat. That rate gap, together with Project Magnet's tax advantages, created an irresistible pull no duty-bound CEO could ignore. The numbers were ruthless. Stay in America, 21% tax, 25% tariff hit, 6.8% borrowing cost. Move to Canada, 12.5% tax, 0 EU duties via CETA, 4.1% borrowing cost. Over 5 years, the savings for a firm like Dow topped $9 billion. $9 billion. No board anywhere abandons $9 billion to protect a president's pride. That isn't loyalty. That is fiduciary failure. Let's take the possibility to its limit, because the nightmare isn't 5 companies departing. The nightmare is an avalanche. Goldman Sachs modeling shared with big clients Monday night warns that a complete exodus of 25, 30 Fortune 500 firms would set off what they term a cascading tax base erosion event. Federal tax income would drop an estimated $48 billion each year. State revenues in the hardest hit places would fall a combined $22 billion. The dollar, already softened by the Japan shock, would face ongoing pressure as corporate money flows toward Canadian and European banks. Goldman's most troubling forecast: a 15% slide in the S&P 500 over 6 months as big investors lower their expectations for U.S. corporate profits. Your 401k, your pension, your retirement account would suffer another brutal loss on top of the 11% already erased by the Japan fallout. The report ends with a line now echoing across Wall Street trading desks since Tuesday: capital has no patriotism. It follows the math. And right now, the math points away from America. From Ottawa, the scene looks very different. To Prime Minister Mark Carney, this represents the largest economic triumph Canada has ever achieved. A former head of both the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England, a lifelong student of capital movement, Carney crafted Project Magnet as a finely tuned weapon. He recognized that Trump's tariffs opened a pressure gap between the economies and built a channel to exploit it with exactness. People close to the Prime Minister's office say the atmosphere is controlled yet profoundly victorious. Carney is said to have told his ministers that Canada didn't take these companies. America drove them out. We just opened the door and switched on the lights. From Beijing, the perspective is equally harmful to U.S. standing, though different in tone. Chinese state outlets are giving the corporate departures front-page treatment. The unspoken message is clear. If American companies themselves no longer believe in American economic policy, why should any outside investor? Projecting economic strength depends on projecting economic steadiness. The moving vans outside Dow's Midland offices are now a global advertisement of American weakness to every government and sovereign fund alive. How does this land with the core supporters? This is the breaking point, and it's uglier than the White House will acknowledge. The MAGA base is divided straight down the center. One side views it as confirmation that corporate America was never truly loyal, that globalist executives will forever chase the cheapest taxes, and that Trump was correct to battle them with tariffs from the beginning. Elite betrayal, standard populist framing. But the other side, the union workers in Auburn Hills, the chemical operators in Midland, the fertilizer staff in Deerfield, are seeing their jobs cross the border under a president who campaigned on bringing work back. That isn't a partisan jab. That is their reality this Tuesday morning. They backed economic nationalism. They received economic abandonment. The populist alliance that lifted Trump in 2024 rested on the vow that American workers would come first. When 43,000 of those workers receive either relocation offers to Canada or layoff notices because they can't follow, the coalition doesn't merely fracture. It bleeds from the middle. History shows that once economic power starts drifting, it rarely returns quickly. When British industry began moving to the American colonies in the late 1700s, Parliament responded with duties, limits, and bans on exporting machines and skilled labor. It failed. Capital found roots. When U.S. manufacturing started flowing to Asia in the 1980s and 1990s, politicians promised protection and trade battles. The jobs still vanished. When Ireland's tax system attracted U.S. drug makers to Dublin in the 2000s, Washington grumbled but never matched the offer. The pattern is old and unforgiving. Economic gravity draws capital toward the path of least friction. Right now, Canada has constructed that path with precision, using America's own tariff strategy as the trigger. The founders grasped a basic truth about commerce and national power. In Federalist number 12, Alexander Hamilton wrote that the success of commerce is the most useful as well as the most productive foundation of national wealth. He saw more clearly than almost any founder that a country's real power flows not just from its armies, but from the creative force of its businesses. When that force departs, the power departs too. The tax foundation shrinks. The innovation network fades. The talent chases the money. This is the true test, not of one leader, not of one political side, but of the American economic system itself. Can a nation that uses tariffs to shield its workers keep functioning when those same tariffs push the employers to another country? Can a country hold global leadership when its own corporations freely pick a foreign home? We have entered unknown territory. The old charts drawn during the age of American economic command are now worthless. The belief that businesses would always select America, that U.S. dominance was as inevitable as gravity, is being challenged right now, and the first returns are disastrous. Heading into Thursday, keep your eyes on three developments. First, the White House executive order. Insiders say a draft IEPA measure is already moving among top aides tonight, and the president is likely to sign some version by Friday morning. If he uses emergency authority to stop corporate moves, anticipate instant lawsuits from the ACLU, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and the affected companies. The constitutional fight over whether a president can confine capital inside national lines will dwarf the New York asset dispute. Second, watch the markets at tomorrow's open. Futures are already showing a 340-point drop as this is recorded. Goldman Sachs has placed a sell call across the entire U.S. industrial group. If the decline passes 500 points, the Federal Reserve could be pushed into an emergency session, and every available choice is grim. Cut rates and fuel inflation already at 4.7%. Hold rates and invite recession. Raise rates and court depression. The board has no winning play remaining. Third, watch Canada. Prime Minister Carney is set to speak to Parliament at 3:00 p.m. EST tomorrow. Ottawa sources say he will unveil Phase 2 of Project Magnet, a targeted effort aimed at American tech giants in Silicon Valley. Should Google, Apple, or Microsoft start signaling any move, the $78 billion departure we're discussing today will seem trivial next to what follows. The White House answer will not be restrained. It will not be a quiet briefing with prepared lines. It will be an executive order, a trade war escalation, a constitutional showdown, likely all three at once. For the 43,000 American employees who just discovered their companies are leaving, the trucks are already packed. For the millions more observing from plants and office buildings across the Midwest and beyond, the doubt is only starting. The tariffs were intended to erect a barrier around the American economy, to lock jobs inside and rivals outside. Instead, they constructed a highway to Canada, and the flow is moving in a single direction. Subscribe. Keep watching. The map of American power is being rewritten live, and nobody in Washington possesses the current chart. Empires do not always collapse under attack. Sometimes they simply load the vans, drive across the line, and never turn back.